Hello, dear listener. Today, I want to talk about one of the most insidious reasons that you might feel lonely, isolated, and like you're not good enough. Now, you may not know this, or you actually might, but those feelings are actually a typical outcome of a certain kind of upbringing. An upbringing by a narcissistic parent. Wait, you might say, my parents were lovely people, and I believe you. However, whether you were raised by great parents, average ones, or off-the-scale psychos, it's not going to prevent you experiencing the kind of formative influence that creates loneliness. And that is because Western culture is raising you exactly like a narcissistic parent would. That societal narcissistic parent is asking you to trade your authenticity for belonging. Through them, you are learning that your needs are a burden and that your real self is unlovable and in need of constant fixing, and that connection is something to earn through performance. Today, I want to show you how society gaslights you, triangulates you, and shifts blame. We'll be covering what narcissism is in its overt and covert forms, and how the demands of narcissistic parents map onto the demands of Western culture. This will include diving into the idea of the false self and, near the end of the episode, what to do to get out alive. Now, in case you're joining me here for the first time, I'm Jordan Rain, philosophy graduate with a severe allergy to self-help gurus, and I've also been through the kind of loneliness that sinks into your bones until you think it will never leave. My own way out began when I went back to the thinkers who inspired me, through the lenses of some pretty cool philosophers, sociologists and psychologists. I finally realised that loneliness is not a personal failing. It is a product of the system working exactly as designed. This episode is about how Western capitalist culture can be seen as a narcissistic parent, in its behaviours, its values, and most importantly, in the effect it has on you. This will be the first in what's going to be a 4-part series on narcissism, and not just as a clinical diagnosis or personality disorder, but as something produced by society itself. In a culture that rewards hyper-individualism, control, image management, and competition, narcissistic traits are not just encouraged, they are required. And the issue is, psychology, the very field that is tasked with helping us understand this, often helps to conceal how Western capitalist culture itself contributes. By reducing narcissism to a personal defect, it hides the fact that narcissism is also a cultural demand. It hides the fact that our culture, Western capitalism, trains us like a narcissistic parent would to live lives of quiet misery and isolation. Like a narcissistic parent, Western culture trains us to become transactional, to devalue feelings in ourselves and in others, and to see others as instruments to our personal hero narrative, and to aim for control over that narrative, rather than opening to connection. Now, narcissism is a growing issue. Dr. Ramani, a psychologist and someone I deeply respect, says narcissistic behaviours are on the rise, and not just personality disorder, but in everyday patterns that we all recognise. Grandiosity, curated false selves, manipulating others to buy things or do things or believe things, and telling people who've had bad things happen to them that it's their own fault because of negative thinking. In other words, blame shifting and a trend towards less empathy. What Dr. Ramani and others confirm is that the rise in these behaviours is not just paranoia. And let's remember, a lot of people with narcissistic traits have a vested interest in shouting, "Oh, so everyone's a narcissist now, are they?" Dr. Ramani says it clearly. Yes, a lot of them are. It's real. Now, the place I do diverge from psychology is its focus on bad apples. Psychology, having drunken the Kool-Aid of hyper-individualism, refuses to look at ecosystems. It won't look at the toxic air in the barrel of apples, just the apples. So today I want to show why narcissism isn't just an individual malfunction. It is the product of a broader social gas leak. And if you fill a barrel with bad gas, none of those apples will stay healthy. And that's not to say everyone's going to become a narcissist, but there are many other ways of being unhealthy, as we're going to get to in the rest of the series. Now, in terms of how this helps you, there is one known weapon against narcissism, be that the personality disorder or the traits, and that weapon is clarity. Now, that might not sound like much, but it is essentially our red pill, and it only comes when we look beyond the individual, because narcissism isn't just a disorder. It is a symptom of a disconnection culture It leaves behind a trail of loneliness in our relationships, our institutions, and in how we see ourselves. The things a narcissistic parent teaches us to strive for are the very things that serve to keep us separate, alone, and crippled by self-doubt. And they're also the very things that Western capitalist culture itself would have us do. Now, a bit of a heads up, the theme of narcissism is vast. There are whole podcasts that just deal in it, right? So I'm breaking this up into 4 parts. Part 1 is this episode. So society as a narcissistic parent, the machinery of disconnection. And this episode's going to explore how Western capitalist culture behaves like a narcissistic parent, demanding compliance, punishing dissent, rewarding image over authenticity, and reducing relationships to transactions. This episode's going to examine the parallels between narcissistic parenting and how society itself raises and shapes us. We're going to examine how power masquerades as care, and how the values we are trained to internalize lead to disconnection automatically, and we're gaslit into believing that we're the ones to blame. Now, part 2, tentatively called the lonely self, the formation of the subject, that's where we're going to turn to the individual, and not as a sealed-off self-causing being, but as someone shaped by cultural pressure and trauma adaptation. There we're going to look at what happens when narcissistic dynamics get internalized, things like fragmenting of the self, roles like people pleaser and the scapegoat in more depth, and the false self in more depth. Now, part 3 is, I'm calling this at the moment, the God complex, narcissism and self-help and spiritualism. Part 3 is going to dive into the societal level symptoms of narcissism, specifically how spiritual and self-help discourses place the individual in the God seat. From manifest your own reality to everything that happens as a reflection of your vibration, these ideologies offer grandiosity as a solution to disconnection. I mean, I can manifest anything, right, under these ways of thinking. I am God. I make stuff materialize. So in other words, Western spiritualism and self-help culture, it's narcissism rebranded, omnipotence without responsibility, and connection replaced by like cosmic exceptionalism. So there we're going to explore how these narratives mirror narcissistic psychology too, and how they contribute to disconnection under the guise of enlightenment. Now, part 4 is called Silencing Experience, and that will be about when institutions mirror narcissism. So we're going to be looking there at how the institutions that claim to help us, like psychology, philosophy, theory, and even NGOs tasked with fixing these issues, can replicate the very dynamics that they critique. And when pain is pathologized, intellectualized, or explained away, we lose our stories. So that 4th episode is going to explore how to reclaim experience not as isolated pathology, but as a response to systemic trauma and enforced performance. So yeah, this is big. This is a big theme. And this 4-part series is going to look at narcissism not just as a diagnosis, but as a cultural logic. All this is about naming what disconnects us and beginning to stitch ourselves back together. This won't just be an exploration of clinical narcissism, though of course that's in there briefly so that we've got a base to work from. It is more a map of Western culture's highways to the one convergent point of disconnection. Because it is only by knowing what exactly is standing in the way that we can find the tiny paths back to connection. So on with the episode at hand. As is usual with philosophy, we need to start by defining our terms. So what do I mean when I say society behaves and raises you like a narcissistic parent? Let's define the terms within that, starting with society. What is society? We often speak of society as if it's like out there and something that we have the choice to maybe react to or maybe ignore. But the truth is, society isn't just what's out there. It's more than even just what we live in. Society comes to live in us. So we're born into it. It pre-exists us, right? And since we come into it young, we can't exist outside of it. We're embedded in it from the very beginning. It shapes our values, our wounds, and even our sense of self. And Pierre Bourdieu talks about this, and I'm going to pronounce French names consistently wrong. I did a whole episode on Fanon where I pronounced his name wrong. I read a lot of philosophy without listening to how to pronounce it. Anyway, Bourdieu writes that society doesn't just surround us, it produces us, shaping at its positions before we're even capable of reflections. And Judith Butler expands on this brilliantly, saying our selves are shaped by the gaze and judgment of society long before we're even conscious of it. And yet, Western capitalist values encourage us to imagine that we're beyond society's influence because we are the cause of everything that happens to us, right? And Western spiritualism and self-help narratives parrot this too. You get to choose what you think, they say. And we're trained to see ourselves as capable of this, as separate from society, and kind of as the only causal elements in our world, that we really can so shut ourselves off from society, we believe it has no effect on us. And there are actually people out there who have told me, oh yeah, I can just ignore all that shit. Yeah. No, I'm not remotely influenced by society. So, well, if you weren't, you'd be dead because, you were once a child. Your mother was there. Either she was there or she was not, or some other person did mothering, right? And you're seriously fucked up when that doesn't happen. It doesn't not influence you, as, hundreds of years of psychology will attest to. Sudden interruption and bad edit, because I forgot to put this in the podcast. The join button now works. If you're watching this on YouTube, there is a little button that says join, so I'm hoping that you've subscribed already. And to get notifications on new episodes, you need to click the little bell. That will actually give you notifications. But if you want to be part of the community and support the podcast at the same time, you can hit the join button now. And there are things on there like monthly Q&As, fortnightly philosophy clubs, and many other things. So I would really appreciate your support, guys, because, this sort of thing can't happen long term without community assistance. So I'd really appreciate it if you do have a couple of bucks to spare that you can support the podcast, and I get to chat to you in there too. There's a chat room even if you're there on the lowest tier, so I can actually get to know you guys a lot more. So it'll be really great to see you there. If you guys can click that would be fantastic. On with the podcast. Western culture and the institutions that uphold it, like psychology and Western spiritualism, they would have us consider ourselves apples that have never been anywhere near a tree. And really, a big part of understanding the kind of apples a tree will sprout, like are they Granny Smiths, are they Red Delicious, or toxic spit it the fuck out before you die flavour, you need to know the tree, and even the soil that tree is in. So otherwise, all we're doing is wondering like idiots why there are so many knotted, malformed green apples, when knowing that tree was a Granny Smith growing in waterlogged soil might really have helped. And Bourdieu is not the only person that says society lives in us. There is Foucault, there's Butler, and even the Taoists have all in different ways pointed to the fact that we are not free-floating individuals. We are shaped by the soil we grow in. And if that soil is poisoned, it would be pretty stupid to look at one apple and go, yeah, rotten to the core, let's avoid that one, I'm sure the rest are fine. And as much as I don't want to do the same thing as psychology does, which is splitting what is really non-divisible systems into meaningless parts, I do have to define my terms to be comprehensible here. So society is that whole system, soil, tree, and all that tree produces. They are inseparable in terms of meaning, and they are causally intertwined. Zhuangzi talks about how we are not separate from the system. We are expressions of it. Distortions in the system ripple through us because everything is interconnected. The self, society, nature, none of it stands alone. He pointed out too that the micro level reflects the macro level, and that's an idea that is crucial for this episode. And no, the micro level does not mean reducing to an individual apple floating about in a vacuum, being red or green or narcissistic all on its own. No, the micro version of any dynamic has to include similar causal and relational elements. So people, rules, power structures, and power imbalances. So we are therefore taking the family as the micro-level system, the family tree, if you like, instead of the societal one. And what we're going to do is look at how the societal ecosystem is mirrored in a narcissistic family dynamic, and vice versa. Our next definition: defining narcissism and narcissistic behaviours. First, let's briefly cover what the DSM has to say about narcissistic personality disorder, so that's NPD for short. The DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, characterises NPD primarily through patterns of grandiosity, in terms of like fantasy or behaviour, need for admiration, and a lack of empathy. Now, it lists a few other behaviours too, such as a sense of entitlement, exploitative tendencies, envy, and arrogance. There are 9 criteria. You can go and look them up on the DSM if you want, and you have to meet a certain number of criteria to be diagnosed with the disorder. Now, all of these traits exist on a continuum, and to get an actual diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder, you have to be quite up there on multiple of these particular criteria that they lay out. Anyway, as simple as it sounds to check things off a list, the DSM has its issues, and there will doubtless be an entire episode on that alone in the future. But for now, suffice to say that there's much discussion around how clinical definitions miss much of what narcissistic characters are like in their day-to-day, what their behaviours feel like, and what it does to those around them in everyday life, especially in families. Experts like Dr. Ramani de Vasula, Otto Kernberg, Heinz Kohut, Eleanor Greenberg, Sam Vaknin, and those who have been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder themselves have really expanded our understanding by naming additional typical behaviours that paint a fuller picture. Now, their knowledge and research has also led us to recognise 2 main types of narcissism that operate quite differently. There's the overt or classic kind of narcissist, and the covert or vulnerable narcissist. And that difference is going to become important in terms of how it mirrors power on the macro level. And as I lay these behavioural descriptions out, right, you might be hit with a sense of déjà vu. And that is because a lot of these behaviours that I'll be talking about match what we've discussed in previous episodes that were actually about capitalist values. Like, for example, how our love of individualism in the hero narrative encourages us to treat other people like props or wallpaper, as per episode 2. Another example, forcing people into roles and refusing to see them as full human beings. That's also a tenet of our culture, as per episode 7, and of narcissistic parenting. If we look at episodes 3 and 4, how being trained to blame ourselves is typical of both narcissistic parents and Western culture's reification of control and cognitive primacy. And when we get to triangulation, which is a favourite tool of narcissistic people, we'll see how that functions just like competition, to pit us against each other, as per episode 5. So, fleshing out these profiles of the narcissistic character types should make it more clear in terms of the commonalities between being raised under Western cultural values and being raised by narcissistic parents. So, to get a better behavioural portrait, I am going to start with what overt and covert narcissists have in common. Now, the growing body of information on narcissistic personality disorders shows a pattern of manipulation tactics common to covert and overt types. All of these tactics are used to exert control. Yep, control is a huge aspect of both narcissism and Western capitalist culture too. So go back to episode 5 if you want a refresher on capitalism's obsession with control. Now, in narcissistic individuals or entities, control trumps connection. There is no eye to eye here. There is only power over or attempts at it. Now, the less fortunate of you out there will have been exposed to these tactics repeatedly, so you may already know what they are through research, or, they may still take you by surprise. For the more fortunate of you, you would have only been on the receiving end of these in a societal sense, and hopefully not as often in a personal sense. So knowing these tactics is key to being able to spot them and call them out and say, I am not accepting this. So here we go. The tactics narcissistic people typically use to control others are as follows. Gaslighting, which is making you doubt your own reality or feelings. Blame shifting, which is dodging responsibility by blaming others or making the other person feel it is their fault. Triangulation, which I just briefly mentioned. That involves manipulating relationships by involving third parties, hence the triangle, to create conflict, competition, or loyalty divides. Lying is pretty obvious what that one means. I think we all know what lying means. And the silent treatment is kind of self-explanatory too, but it's using deliberate silence to punish or gain power. And this is sometimes known as stonewalling as well, as identified by the Goldmans as one of the 4 horsemen of the relational apocalypse, because it's named as a toxic behaviour. Now, overt narcissists will often use intimidation as well, like direct threats or aggressive behaviour, but coverts tend to avoid that. And as we'll see, that difference becomes pivotal when it comes to power structures. But the take-home is, using all of these tactics to gain control, a narcissistic person is not interested in connection. Instead, it's all about control over how others act, how others think, and how others see them. And the tactics used over time, they work to train others to behave in the ways that the narcissistic person likes. And when that training doesn't work, that person is discarded or exiled. The training also goes in a particular pattern, teaching others to ignore their own needs, to internalise blame, and to regulate their own behaviour so that it fits with what the narcissistic person desires. Deja vu about the panopticon effect, anyone? Which we mentioned in episode 4. It's just like that, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. A very important aspect of the development of narcissistic personality disorder is the false self. Researchers like Covert, Masterson, Winnicott and Miller have all contributed to our understanding of the false self. James Masterson argued that narcissistic individuals cannot access or live from their true self, because doing so, for them, would provoke overwhelming anxiety. So they live through the false self. Masterson explains it like this. It's like the false self acts as a manager, like carefully curating external perception to ensure attachment and control. This means the narcissist's life strategy becomes creating and defending a pleasing persona. They don't opt for achieving this by being the good person they imagine they are, because it's a false self, remember, it's not them. Instead of being the thing that they want us to believe they are, they use guilt-inducing and emotionally manipulative tactics to make us believe that's what they are. In other words, Masterson explains, they use these tactics to sustain the illusion that their public face is their core. And they actually think it is. Now, this might already be reminding you of a certain incredibly famous philosopher and sociologist, and among other things, Karl Marx. Now, Marx said that ideology exists to make the rule of the powerful appear good. Not just acceptable, but natural and even virtuous. And Karl Marx talks about ideology as framing domination as wanting what is best for you. So here is the first parallel between narcissistic parenting and the societal level forces such as ideology, where both make you believe that their rule is actually something positive. But let's bring it back to the personal level of the person that actually suffers from narcissistic personality disorder. It's also a seriously Zizek'ian example of something containing its own contradiction. The narcissist believes their false self is the only self, their true self. But they also know, on some semi-conscious level, that they have to constantly work to ensure others believe it. So really they simultaneously know and doubt. And so unsurprisingly, Masterson called narcissism the personality disorder of the false self, because the entire personality is organised around image control and affect suppression. And, you could call this image management. Isn't it really interesting that this is now a commonly used phrase in our society? Like, to be saleable, to have value, we must also have an image that others perceive as valuable, even if it isn't in reality. There's going to be more on that and an expansion on the idea of the false self in this series, because there are actually other kinds of false selves, right, with different motivations and behaviours, and they'll become relevant later on. But for now, I want to get to the important distinction between overt and covert narcissists. Now, when it comes to distinguishing between overt and covert narcissists, I'm going to begin with the overt narcissists, because they're just flaming obvious, right? Overt narcissists are like washed-up pop stars in neon spandex screaming, "You love me, Berlin," at a sheep shearing contest in rural New Zealand. And the sheep are leaving. But they're also, despite what they would love you to think, less relevant than their covert counterparts. So, their grandiosity and desire for validation are always on display. These are the ones you likely already recognise and have definitely seen, unless you've somehow done the impossible and managed to miss out on the entire of US politics in the last 10 years. They are essentially annoying posers, but actually quite scary and dangerous behind the scenes. So, it's not actually just all laughs. I shouldn't just make jokes about them lest one of them hunt me down and blow me up in a fanfare of self-righteousness. Because that is one thing about overt narcissists. You do know when they're mad because it's explosive and sometimes dangerous. You do know what they think of you too, even if that changes randomly and suddenly, because they're not that nuanced. Essentially, you are a bad object, let me smash you, or you are a good object, let me fuck you or praise you. This good object, bad object thing that has to do with object permanence, but that is beyond the scope of this already going to be long podcast. Now, one weighty thing overt narcissist parents have, along with their covert cousins, is a very particular set of rules and expectations about how you are meant to act. Now, these rules can be added to or altered on a dime, and you are meant to know via mind reading when that happens. So when you inevitably violate one of these rules, or when you actually didn't but they think you did, boom, an explosion of rage and punitive measures ensues. And even though challenging them is generally met with more explosive and terrifying retaliation, you can, at least in your mind, know that they are fucking unreasonable pricks. Now, my father was one of these, and the fact that he was an unreasonable prick was the elephant in the room for most of my childhood. And when I finally pointed out his unreasonable prickness, I was exiled from the family home. I hadn't finished school yet. And that illustrates one habit that they have that's relevant to power and how they use it. They over-punish in that I will crush you like an ant if you question me type way. Now, Heinz Kohut has a quote that I want to use here, and it's about what happens when you disrupt a narcissist's self-image, which is what calling them an unreasonable prick is an example of. Quoting here, "The narcissistically disturbed individual must retain the illusion of the perfect self-image. When this image is threatened, the whole psychic structure trembles." That's Kohut from the Analysis of the Self. And when that structure trembles with an overt narcissist, your whole world will. It's actually terrifying. Maybe hilariously. In terms of what such people do not like hearing, this is what makes them less relevant. I mean, less relevant to my statement about society acting like a narcissistic parent, okay? They're certainly not less relevant in terms of their impact on your life. If you're dealing with one of these people, I feel awful for you, and I really hope that you can get help. Get someone to get you out of their presence. They are really terrifying, damaging people. But in terms of what I'm saying about society, they are less relevant to my point. They hate being less relevant. This is why I'm quipping about it when, maybe I shouldn't be, because for those of you dealing with these people, this is a relentless horror. But here it is in terms of the point that I'm trying to make. In terms of power, you can see their lack of fairness. You can see their failure to treat you with basic human dignity. And it doesn't really earn them much respect, it just earns them fear. Really, the reason they're on a side here is because they mirror dictatorships rather than Western capitalism. Yep, they are openly terrifying, and especially if you're a kid, or one of their subjects, or one of their citizens on the macro level. And like I say, if you've had one of these people as a parent, you have suffered big time. You got a dictatorship at home, nestled within the covert mindfuck of wider society that I'm going to get to in a minute. In any case, if anything will be their downfall, it is the fact of their own overtness, and only sometimes, unfortunately. Being an obvious prick inspires rebellion. Think Stalinist Russia, a terrifying regime, so aggressively and visibly controlling that people risked death to resist it. Now, that kind of raw, oppressive power eventually fuels underground movements, covert dissidents, and revolutionary thought. So, an overt narcissist's obvious shititude is what can give you the strength to say, "Fuck off, you unreasonable bastard," even though that may cost you a place to live, or actually your life in some cases. But back to the part where we get to label them less relevant. With the arguable exception of Germany, maybe, which is kind of this mixed bag, it loves over-punishment, and you cannot avoid accidentally breaking one of its insane number of rules that no person can know at some point. So you live in fear, here as well. But on the whole, modern Western capitalist cultures don't usually run on the overt narcissist kind of fear and dictatorship kind of power. Instead of brute force and fear, most Western capitalist cultures run on something far more invisible, what philosopher Michel Foucault calls disciplinary power. Now, Foucault talks about how modern capitalist societies don't punish openly. Instead, the modes of self-control kind of seep into you. You internalize societal rules, as we talked about in episode 4 with the panopticon. What he means is under disciplinary power, the kind of power that Western capitalist culture has, we come to monitor and regulate ourselves, so no dictator is needed. Foucault points out too that disciplinary power operates in cultures that seem safe enough for its values to get internalized. Because, like, if no one's pointing a gun at your head, and the values aren't, like, yeah, go kill your neighbour, you can often kind of relax and feel just like, go along with it. You may even think that you chose these values for yourself. And when we think that we chose to do something, we're far more likely to keep doing it than when it's been clearly forced upon us. So now we get to covert narcissists, the real parallel to Western capitalist power dynamics. The power that Michel Foucault talks about is exactly the kind of power of the covert narcissist, who is also referred to as the vulnerable narcissist. This flavour of narcissist is the one I am referring to when I say that modern Western culture behaves like a narcissistic parent. No blow-ups, no raging, more like a mask of fake concern and practice sweetness, or maybe wounded, guilt-inducing confusion. They train you with that guilt, and with exclusion games. They also love the silent treatment, along with all the other tactics that we mentioned earlier, gaslighting, blame-shifting, triangulation, lying. They wield a far more subtle mix of all of these things. These are the narcissists that silently and steadily erode your selfhood, rather than openly hacking chunks off it. Now, if you grew up with this kind of treatment on the micro level, you may not even know it. You may only know that you feel absolutely awful every day. Some of you will have managed to figure it out. It can take decades. It literally took me decades. It's embarrassing. In any case, it hurts. Because we all want acceptance and love and positive reflection. As kids, those things are vital for our development. But with a covert narcissist, these things either won't come at all, or they'll have a massive price. Even our most basic needs will not be met unless the covert narcissistic parent gets some benefit from doing so. Now I'm going to illustrate that with a real world example, right? And because by now I know a lot of people with similar stories to mine, but I don't want to tell other people's stories, so the examples I'm going to draw on are my own, right? So just as background, the person that gave birth to me, I call her Bertha. Not because that is her name, obviously, but because that is all she did. I can't call her my mother because she didn't mother. She wasn't my mother or anyone else's. As a covert narcissist, she couldn't do mothering, only resentment. So Bertha, like many covert narcissist parents, she couldn't be bothered feeding us. It was an inconvenience to her. And this was not because we were poor or because she didn't have time, because in the 70s, some of you remember it, a lot of you won't, in the 70s, it was possible for one member of a couple to stay home without going bankrupt. Imagine that. I don't think that's possible anymore. Anyway, she had the time. It was just that she didn't want to bother. So what she'd do is buy these big bags full of little bags of crisps. And there were the biscuits and sweets, because she loved biscuits and sweets. And she'd just tell us, take the crisps to school. Now, we actually thought this was great at the time, and so did the other kids at school. It's, oh, wow, that's cool. You always have sweets and crisps. And, we were in primary school, right? So we didn't know a damn thing about nutrition. We just thought it tasted good. And Bertha went along with this because she's seeing these other kids go, oh, that's really cool. And she considered herself like the cool mum that gave the kids, the cool stuff, not like other boring mums. So she managed to turn her own neglect into a bit of a hero narrative. But here's the thing. When something starts to negatively affect a covert narcissist reputation, things change drastically. So here we go. The thing is, that's all we got, crisps and chocolate and, all of the things that she would actually privately binge on, I found out decades later. And it might have been fine, really. We got food. There's plenty of kids that just don't get food at all, right? But this kind of diet has its effects. And she would eventually start calling us fat, because, we probably were. And this would start with her silent disgust that you'd have to break through, and then at some point she'd explode and put us on a diet. And the first diet I was on, I was 6 years old. Diets consisted of getting almost nothing. And, we would beg or steal. It's beg for or steal the cookies and sweets. So it became this sort of horrible, vicious circle. Anyway, I remember having this kind of what I thought at the time was a revelation at the age of 10. I knew quite consciously what she wanted of me. And, that I was not an inconvenience with any request for food like the other kids got, right? Or any request for anything. But B, that I should be thin, because if I wasn't, otherwise she would hate me more than usual. So I stopped eating. And I remember realizing, I can just stop eating. This seemed like such an intelligent workaround at the time in the mind of a 10-year-old. And it worked. She kind of left me alone for a while. But it became clear to the teachers at school that I had anorexia at the age of 10. And this made my mother wild. She did the seething, silent anger and couldn't hold on to it for very long. I was like, what's wrong? Nothing. And then, for God's sake, what will people think? And she nutted out at me for, making people think badly of her. And she forced me to eat. And even at that age, because there were some good teachers who knew what was going on, I knew I needed and I wanted counselling. And I asked Bertha if I could have counselling at the age of 10. And she said, for God's sake, how hard is it just to eat? Why do you insist on shaming the family? So there's the classic example, right? The covert narcissist looks at the symptom that they have caused, right? This is childhood neglect that I'm talking about. And their actions have a certain effect, a negative effect. I was the symptom of a sick family at the time. And she hits the symptom and says, you are to blame. You, symptom, you are to blame for the actions that were hers. So you can see the classic blame shifting, right? This has nothing to do with her actually neglecting her children. This has everything to do with a child just doing random things that, completely uncaused. That child has decided to shame the family. The point is, with a covert narcissist, you learn what's expected of you. You learn what gets you guilted, what gets you excluded, what gets you yelled at, ridiculed, or called too needy, or too fat, or too much. And the panopticon effect kicks in real quick. I literally remember the moment when I go, this is what is expected of me, and this is how I can get love. It was a bizarre feeling. You internalize their rules and make them your own. You even internalize their preferences and make them your own too. If their preference was for you to stay quiet or out of sight, then you'll give up any loud hobbies you might have. If your quietness bothers them and they want you to be more outgoing, you will staunchly try to be a more outgoing child. The point is, you become that self-monitoring, self-regulating machine that we talked about in episode 3 with the panopticon. You do this to avoid shame or blame at all costs, because you conclude that if you don't need anything from them and just behave as they want you to, you will finally get that love and that belonging, that acceptance that says you're okay, even if it means never, ever being you. Alice Miller discusses this dynamic in the drama of The Gifted Child. She shows how children of narcissistic or emotionally immature parents become what their parents need them to be, suppressing their authentic emotions. Miller emphasizes that the child performs for love, building a certain kind of false self, one that is aimed at earning connection through carefully curated behavior. And you remember the idea of false selves? By contrast, the narcissist's false self is a performance for control. So we've got one false self seeking connection, that's Miller's one, and the other avoiding it and seeking control instead. Now, in the next episode, we are going to go deeper into kinds of false selves, because there are a number of them, and narcissistic environments can lead to a plurality of kinds of false self. So we're going to explore that too. For now, it's important to note that the false self that Miller describes often leads to depression or identity crises and frequently collapses into shame. Now, Roningstam explains that although both types of false self harbour a shame-based core, the connection-seeking false self tends to collapse inwards, whereas the narcissistic false self tends to deflect shame onto everyone around them. Here is the hefty problem though. A covert narcissist, like their societal counterpart, wants you to develop a false self, one that never inconveniences them, one that is their definition of good. They train you to be a version of yourself that benefits them. And I'd like to remind you at this point of those slogans like, be your best self or become the best version of you. These things are still on high rotate in coaching and marketing and fitness circles. And it also pushes this message of be this other, better version of yourself. And, what counts as the best version is unlikely to be on your terms. Or we might think it is, but generally it's in accord with the values that you've internalized, be that from the micro-level system or the macro-level system. A best self is most likely to be seen as more beautiful, higher earning, more independent, or more in control. In both the parental case and the societal case, we have convinced ourselves that some external player's needs are our needs, and that is how they rule. But there's more. The jewel in the societal or covert narcissistic parent's crown is this. Once you've internalized their rules, you also believe any pain you experience at their hand is your fault. It's simple, and especially as a kid, right? You broke the rules, therefore it's your fault. You were too needy. Your loudness or quietness or enthusiasm or boredom, whatever, is wrong. Or it's a massive burden, or it's a dreadful, fatal flaw. You were not being a good version of yourself. You were being a shit version of what is expected of you. To be a better version, under no circumstances, be yourself. Now, I said that was the jewel in their crown. Really, there's another. Actually, this is more like the key weapon in the arsenal of covert narcissistic parents or Western capitalist society. It is called plausible deniability. All that gaslighting, blame shifting, guilt tripping, lying, manipulation, triangulation, silent treatment, all of the rest, it can be done behind a sort of wall of invisibility called plausible deniability. Plausible deniability is a sort of protective shield around a false self. It keeps it intact no matter what a person does. So if your long-suffering saint of a parent does something dodgy or cruel or deliberately nasty, plausible deniability is the mechanism that allows them to claim they are not and shift the blame for their actions onto you. Here is an example, okay, of what I mean by plausible deniability. Imagine this. Yesterday, your mother or your best friend, who's not very nice, did a long tirade about how Helen, who lives next door, is not as beautiful as everyone makes out because Helen has knock knees. So, this friend of yours or your parent, she's waxed lyrical and dismissive about how anyone could think this so-called beauty is beautiful at all. Anyway, you're visiting said friend or parental figure, and you're wearing your new knee-high boots, which you saved up for months, and which you really dig. And when you ask her if she likes how they look on you, she stares straight at your knees and says, "Oh, they make you look just like Helen." Now, you know she means you're not knock-kneed, given her tirade the day before. So you say, are you trying to tell me that I've got knock knees? And her reply will be something like this. "God, I can't say anything. You're so sensitive. Everyone knows Helen is beautiful. I give you a compliment and you throw it in my face. What kind of a daughter are you? Or friend, or whatever." Yeah, this was a real-life example, courtesy of Bertha. And what it shows is this. Plausible deniability is a way for a narcissistic individual to claim, "I didn't do anything," that you're imagining it, or you're too sensitive, or in whatever way, you are the problem and they are not. Their reputation is intact. In fact, you are just being completely unreasonable and flawed. And this trick is it's not just a shitty thing to do to people. Right? It is that, right? But it's not just that. It is central to your training. And it can serve to make that training almost imperceptible, because plausible deniability allows a covert narcissistic parent to disconnect you from your intuition, to say that what you felt and understood from their actions is all in your head. And that is how they hollow you out gradually, silently and invisibly, because they can tell you are paranoid, oversensitive, imagining things, exaggerating, making stuff up. And over time, you start to believe this, redefining yourself as too much or overly emotional, just as they portrayed you. So you go along with their version of reality, accepting their interpretation of you, their wants, their needs, and their rules, unknowingly and willingly. And at the same time, by becoming the object of blame, the scapegoat, whenever you don't react to your training properly, you reflect their self-image as the martyr they believe themselves to be. So another lived example, because Bertha did actually bless me in the end. When the upsetting memories finally sort of faded into just being useful and illustrative insights, Bertha hated me. She hated me because she hated herself, and I looked just like she did as a child. But worse, right? I had red hair. And in New Zealand in the 70s and 80s, that was a ticket to lifelong bullying for being horribly ugly. So yeah, let's not reminisce that things were better in the 70s and 80s. Now, anyway, obviously I got bullied for this at school too, because red hair really was the ticket to just a horrible life back then. Thank God some things changed, including perceptions of beauty. Anyway, Bertha, that's for another episode. Bertha trained my siblings to ridicule me too, for being fat, ugly, laughable, and so on, because that's how she saw me. I just didn't fit what she had wanted. A beautiful baby girl to prove that she had beauty in her. So I became the scapegoat. And I know from the comments on the very first episode that many of you were given this role too. So for you, fellow scapegoats, there is a special place in my heart, because I know what you went through. And the doubly shitty thing is, you likely got it again from society. Anyway, at Christmas, to the illustrative example, Bertha used to, she'd buy my siblings normal presents, and among the few normal things that she got me, there was always what I came to call the bomb. Sometimes two of them. And I knew they were coming, and it was like roulette, because we would open presents in front of each other, right? So my siblings would get to watch and judge and wait for the inevitable, which were presents like pads to stop your feet stinking, pills to stop your farts stinking, books with advice about problems that my siblings could laugh at and that I never knew I had. And the message was not just you stink, but you are a problem. And here, I have the solution, because I am so caring. Now, Bertha was masterful because her tactics struck that brilliant balance, right? They were clear enough that my siblings laughed their asses off every time like well-trained monkeys. And yet, they were plausibly deniable enough to still function. When I called her out, she said I was ungrateful or too sensitive because she was only trying to help. Then she could get all depressed about being unappreciated, and my siblings would comfort her and shut me out for hurting Bertha. So, yeah, by the way, that's called supply, right? Bertha trained my siblings to be her caretakers, so she got supply from that. She got supply from being able to tell her scapegoat they were an embarrassment and the root of all her problems, and then get comforted. Win, win, win for her. Now, the point is, it is just like society telling us we have a problem and that they know the solution. That is what marketing and consumerism is based on. And when we insist that the problem is not us, rather their values and awful way of being, we are shamed and blamed and told that we are terrible to be around. So let's compare more directly what covert narcissistic parents teach you with what growing up and surviving in Western capitalist society trains you to believe. Number 1, relationships are transactional. Covert narcissistic parents teach you that love is conditional. It must be earned by pleasing them, caring for them, or making them look good. Your value lies in your utility. As long as you meet their needs, you are loved. If you stop performing, the connection disappears instantly and completely. It's like a factory floor light switch is flipped. Now, how society teaches you the same thing is something we discuss in episode 2. That's where we unpacked how the hero narrative, that cultural ideal which casts the individual as the solitary saviour on a grand personal quest, and within that myth, others become one of 3 things. Obstacles to be eliminated or avoided. That's 1. 2. Tools to be used as a means to an end. Or the 3rd thing, scenery, wallpaper, to be ignored. That is not connection. That is transaction. And it mirrors the covert narcissistic parent dynamic. People are only valuable if they serve that central character. If you're not enhancing the hero's mission, you're in the way. Now that is how a child becomes wallpaper in their parent's story, and how all of us become wallpaper in society's narrative of success. So in terms of relationships, to summarise, both covert narcissistic parents in Western capitalist society teach us that relationships are about utility, not genuine connection. Number 2, you are cast in a role and not seen as your full self. Now, as I said, I know a few of you out there were assigned the scapegoat role too. So you already know this. Like any dysfunctional family, covert narcissistic parents don't relate to their children as full, evolving people. Instead, they assign rigid roles early on. And those roles tend to stick, or be changed arbitrarily, but you are just seen as the role and never as natural character. Psychologists like Dr. Carol McBride, John Bradshaw, Shahida Arabi and Christine Hammond have all documented these roles in quite some detail. Right, you've got the golden child who is idealised and praised, but only for reflecting the narcissist's self-image. You've got the scapegoat, blamed for everything that goes wrong in the system. You have the lost child, the ultimate wallpaper child who is just ignored and forgotten. And you've got the caretaker or helper who is emotionally parentified and who serves the emotional needs of the adult. And it barely needs pointing out, if you're slotted into one of these archetypes, the reality of your depth is ignored. Your resistance to the role is also often taken as some kind of twisted confirmation, right? like with Bertha, pointing out her unjust treatment made her more convinced that I was oversensitive. And to her, I will always be laughable, ugly, and an embarrassment. And if I won a Nobel Prize in physics, it wouldn't change it. In society, in episode 7, we talked about how roles and archetypes are assigned in Western capitalism. Fanon and Butler's work describe how once those roles are assigned, you'll be viewed solely through the lens of that role. Just like with narcissistic parents, all evidence that you are not what they imagined will just be ignored. So comparing both, covert narcissistic parents and society flatten you. They imprison identity, resist or punish change, and ignore evidence that contradicts assigned roles. Number 3, divide and conquer. Competition as control. So I mentioned triangulation earlier on, right? And this is one of the covert narcissist's sharpest tools in terms of creating competition. As McBride and Hammond outline, this means pitting children against each other through comparison, favoritism, and subtle messages of worth. Things like, why can't you be more like your sister? Or at least Melanie appreciates the effort that I go to. The purpose of those comments? To create rivalry instead of solidarity, to prevent alliance building that could challenge the narcissist's control or societal control, and to reinforce compliance by making love and approval scarce. Western capitalist culture does this on the macro level. As we saw in episode 5, it institutionalizes competition, rewarding those who play the game and perform best by its standards. Those who fall behind are left behind in the name of a total misunderstanding of Darwinism. Individual success becomes the currency of worth, and collective care becomes dangerous. Comparing the two succinctly, covert narcissistic parents in Western society foster rivalry and distrust instead of connection and collective power. We are taught to compare rather than connect, because a connected collective might resist. And that, for both the narcissistic parent and neoliberal capitalism, is a threat. Number 4, the blame is always yours. In the narcissistic family, everything that goes wrong is your fault because you're flawed. No matter what the people around you are doing, it's your fault because you are too sensitive, too emotional, too needy. Your pain is a tiresome burden. Their values and behaviour, these are seen as neutral or even benevolent. And if you're not fine with what's going on, it's because you are defective. That is not just dysfunctional parenting, that is gaslighting. And it's not limited to the home. As explained in episodes 3 and 4, this mindset is the very backbone of CBT-based pop psychology and Western spiritualism. Your thoughts shape your reality. If something isn't working, that's because you're not aligned, not grateful, not manifesting properly. Again, no matter what the system around you is doing. Again, if you're not happy, it's because you're defective. This is hopefully, obviously, a spiritualized version of the same narcissistic gaslighting, right? A system that injures you, then tells you that you're the problem for being wounded. So, to compare the two succinctly again, both the covert narcissistic parent and Western capitalist culture engage in gaslighting. They insist on self-blame, regardless of circumstances, and warp your sense of yourself and of reality. You are trained to doubt your own perception, to override your instincts. And we talked about this in the episode on cognitive primacy too, right? How Western culture decouples us from our instincts and labels them irrational, just like a narcissistic parent would. Number 5, internalized control. You silence yourself. By the time you've internalized these dynamics, you no longer need the narcissist to police you. You monitor yourself. You silence your own needs before you can be punished for having them. You anticipate disapproval and you adjust in advance. You censor any emotion that might cost you connection, be that joy, desire, anger, sadness, anything that you have learned the narcissistic parents will distance themselves from you for. In terms of society, this is what Michel Foucault called disciplinary power. In episode 4, we discussed how this is modelled in the Panopticon, a prison where no guards needed to be present because the prisoners assumed that they were always being watched. The result? Self-policing, internalized shame, and quiet compliance. Compared succinctly, both covert narcissistic parents and Western capitalism create internalized disciplinary power, where you police and silence yourself constantly, where you perform or fear the consequences, where you do what is expected or are exiled. Number 6, you are isolated and taught to fear connection. Now this might be the crux point, considering this is a podcast on loneliness. This is the most relevant thing when it comes to that subject. Covert narcissistic parents isolate you from your siblings, from your friends, and, as we said, from your own intuition. They themselves become your only frame of reference. They must be your only point of reference, because if you saw what healthy looked like, their game would be up. And let's remember, their life project is making sure that you believe they are good people. I remember both of my parents doing parodies of one of our neighbours' families, right? My parents called them sickening and encouraged us to laugh at their fake affection and stupid lovey-doveyness. So what my parents did, they literally taught us to equate affection with stupidity. And life is some kind of competition, surprise, surprise, as to who was the smartest. So if you want to be the smartest, yeah, don't be affectionate. And looking back, I came to know that family as an adult, right? They were healthy, caring, warm people. Things that just made no sense to two narcissistic parents and were basically a threat to their way of operating. Now, society does this too. It tells you others are competition, not allies. It calls any kind of deep feeling weakness and shames you for having them and shames you for having needs. It asks you to show only your polished, superior brand. And authentic connection becomes dangerous or seen as something inferior people need. We talked in episode 6, right, about how Western culture pathologizes what is seen as opposite to its ideals. And with individualism as an ideal, relying on each other gets pathologized as codependence, for example. Loneliness, therefore, is not an accident. It is a design feature. Both narcissistic parents and Western culture create loneliness as deliberate outcomes, blocking healthy relationships and pathologizing mutual support. Number 7, covert narcissistic parents don't just control you, they teach you to believe that their control is care. I'm doing this for your own good. But at the same time, that their needs are your needs. So that shrinking yourself to fit their standards becomes, to you, what being a good person means. And over time, this is how their rules get inside you. And once you internalize them, you start performing them willingly. You think that you chose them because this is the best thing to do so that everyone gets along, right? What else functions like that? Well, ideology. Marx said, ideology exists to make the rule of the powerful appear good. Not just acceptable, but natural and even virtuous. It frames domination as wanting what's best for you. And of course, we've talked about Foucault a lot, who takes this idea further, arguing that in modern societies, power doesn't need to shout. It whispers. And its biggest trick, making us believe we chose it and that we're free. And when a covert narcissist teaches you to monitor yourself, to perform what they want without even being asked, you stop noticing that it's actually control because you think it's your own idea. You internalize the rules so deeply that you stop seeing them as rules at all. You think you're doing your best to get along. And I'm going to briefly mention Althusser here, who's going to come out a lot more in the next episode. Just to sort of pack it into a nutshell, he shows that ideology doesn't just live in our heads, it lives in our actions. It's in what we do, often without thinking. So it's there in the curated persona, the obsession with being seen the right way, the constant self-editing, the self-discipline, and the polished surface. And we call it self-improvement. It's actually submission to all of the ideas that are floating around us that we have adopted, internalized, and we think that's going to empower us. There's Marx saying what he does. Ideology exists to make the rule of the powerful appear good. We go along with it going, this is great, this is self-improvement. If I go along with this stuff, I can improve myself, I can be a better person. All we're doing is complying. So to go back to narcissistic family systems, this is why they aren't just damaging, they're actually instructive. They model how ideology works on the micro level. On the micro level, they show us what happens when a dominant figure reshapes reality, enforces invisible rules, punishes resistance through guilt or exclusion games, and then trains us to uphold that system, even when the authority figure isn't present. That's what the roles are for in narcissistic families, so that the other siblings will maintain the order, will still hassle the scapegoat and worship the golden child in the absence of the parent. It's a self-sustaining loop, just like ideology at the macro level. The narcissistic family teaches its members to perform a reality that benefits the one in power. And we learn to call that performance love, or growth, or success. And in both the narcissistic home and capitalist culture, control doesn't just happen through force, it happens through participation. And the more we participate, the more we believe it was our idea all along. And that's the final layer of the mindfuck, right? Not just obedience, but complicity that feels like freedom. Fuck, that's clever. And what does that complicity produce? Usually some sort of false self. A version of you shaped by power, dressed up as choice. And that's what we're going to get to more next week. What this stuff does to us, aside from the obvious, which is fuck us up quite severely. So let's take a moment to really feel all of what we've covered. So this is the summary. And we began by uncovering how narcissism is not just a label for a type of person, but a relational dynamic built on power, control, and invisible rules. It's It's a system that thrives on emotional manipulation, where love is conditional, connection is transactional, and your reality is constantly tested. In these spaces, whether it is a family or a workplace or society at large, survival means learning to perform. You learn to shrink yourself, to hide what's true, and mirror what others expect. And not because you lack strength, but because the system demands your compliance to maintain the illusion of care. It's for your own good. And this system, it's bigger than any one person. It extends beyond your home. If it's already there in your home in the manners I've described, really, my heart goes out to you, because you are getting a double and potentially a triple whammy if you're getting this at work too. It is bigger than one person. It extends beyond your home. It becomes ideology. Ideology that whispers, this is your choice. This is your freedom. It's so clever. I'm torn between disgust and admiration for how these things work. But it does this while quietly reshaping who you think you are, what you feel, and how you see the world. And we aren't just meant to survive in these dynamics, right? We're meant to internalize them. Next week, we're going to look at what happens when we do. And, a few spoilers. Our nervous system rewires. Our sense of self fragments. You may find yourself developing such mechanisms as hypervigilance, people-pleasing, becoming emotionally numbing out, or being endlessly self-critical. You may find yourself drawn back to patterns that repeat the very kind of harm you tried to escape. And it hurts. It hurts. But if it doesn't, right, then you have successfully killed off your inner world just as instructed. Congratulate yourself. But to be honest, I don't believe you, because you wouldn't have gotten to the end of this video if you had managed to kill off your inner world. So thank you for making it this far through the episode. That means there is something right with you. A lot of self-help culture will only ever talk about there is something wrong with you, how to fix it. There is something right with you if you are still here and if you're in pain, because chances are, dear listener, the fact that you're still listening is because it sometimes still feels like a war inside. And that pain is the signal that you still feel. You still remember who you are, or at least that there is a you beneath the performance. And that means they didn't win. Not yet. But what happens next, right? In the next episode, we're going to dive deeper. We'll explore how these dynamics don't just shape your feelings or your actions, but often become the very core of who you are. We'll talk about how power works at the macro level through culture, ideology, and social norms, mirroring the same patterns of a covert narcissistic family. And we'll look at the kind of false selves, you already know there's a plurality of them, and coping mechanisms that we have to build to survive. The masks that we think we need to protect us. Those same masks that trap us and isolate us, even when we hope they give us shelter. And we're going to explore how even the most damaging survival strategies, such as narcissism itself, can come to be a logical response to internalizing the values that Western capitalism enshrines. With that, it should become easier to understand why those who notice and log the rise in narcissism are correct, and why we need to deeply question what Western capitalism demands we value if we want any hope of rebuilding connection. Finally, we're going to look at the outcome of a culture whose values demand narcissistic adaptations, disconnection and loneliness for both the compliantly narcissistic and the less compliant alike. And that outcome is loneliness. That's why we're all here. It is a deeply human longing, and one that alerts us to the fragmentation inside ourselves and the fragmentation in society as a whole. And I hope you'll join me then for that next episode. Till then,